Castlevania Lords of Shadow 2 is a game that is almost entirely carried by two things. The first is its incredible original soundtrack scored by Oscar Araujo. With its themes of descent and ascension, it lends itself superbly well to the higher elements of LOS 2. I urge you to go out and find a copy of this soundtrack regardless of what you think of the game itself. The second is LOS 2's supremely creative art design. Bosses and level elements, including anything from a mosaic floor to a simple switch on the wall, have been designed as though they're going into production to sell to some billionaire Saudi oil baron. And it's this attention to detail spread across the merely functional to the more interactive elements of the game that suggests that LOS 2 is not without its merits. Purely as a work of art, ignoring the gameplay itself, LOS 2 has an incredible amount of potential, but it's let down by archaic design principles and lengthy drawn-out filler. So much filler, more filler than I've ever seen in a game of this genre, but we'll come to that in more detail in a moment. The 35th entry in the Castlevania series, a series which has seen many changes of direction in its time, LOS 2 has you playing as Dracula, voiced by Robert Carlyle, who's competent but feels a tad wasted in places, or maybe muted is the better term. Awaking weak, Dracula must work with Zobek, played by Patrick Stewart, to take down Satan, but Alucard and Simon Belmont want him dead. LOS 2 is steeped in controversy, without aid of Hideo Kojima, who joined in 2010 for Lords of Shadow. I don't base my views on third-party claims, but I bring them up because playing LOS 2 you can't help but feel something is deeply awry with the game design. The opening sequences of around 2 or so hours fill LOS 2 with a world of potential. The epic scale, pacing and momentum is all there, and you get a sense that Dracula's journey will be a tough and trying one. It's difficult to avoid being immediately drawn into the beautiful visuals and aforementioned themes, but things quickly take a turn for the worse. Much of the game takes place in the future, or in an alternative present or something, and at first I wasn't really against the juxtaposition. I started feeling a familiarity between LOS 2 and Soul Reaver or Legacy of Kain. Not that either of those games were set in the present, but Dracula's weakened state and new abilities reminded me of Raziel, and that was pretty awesome.
The flames don't go out entirely. I must do something else to extinguish them.
It's when frequent bouts of stealth inaction come about that you slightly realise whoever was directing this thing was running the shop like a dictator. Elements that clearly didn't work or weren't all that fun were thrown in without enough consideration, and whilst the stealth elements are functional, they're frustrating as hell because they require patience. And it's difficult to be patient when you don't want to be playing a stealth game. Stealth does play a large role in LOS 2, but it's one that has been slightly blown out of proportion. The earlier parts of the game feature more frequent stealth antics than the latter, and when you get a hang of the mechanics, including turning into a rat to cut wires and commandeering the enemy bodies, they're really a breeze. It's when the game forces stealth in boss battles that I really question what the hell they were thinking, as I try to shimmy my way to a door without treading on leaves so the boss I'm about to fight doesn't catch me. What does it matter if they catch me if I'm about to fight them? But in reality, these segments make up a minority of the game, and the majority is pretty awesome, inventive, visually fantastic, and with the original boss battles, lots of them, with well-acted, well-animated cutscenes, I really had quite a good time. Between these is the standard hack and slash action, wherein Dracula juggles 3 main attack powers: the sword, fists or claws, and the patented chain whip. Like in 2010's LOS, the sword replenishes health, and using the whip for long enough unlocks orbs to replenish the power of both special weapons. All standard stuff, nothing new really, but it fits well within the genre and it offers great combat. What isn't so great, however, is the amount of goddamn filler in LOS 2. Empty, featureless rooms have you bouncing around platforming for no other reason than to pad the game out, and they throw in some secret unlocks, gems and orbs around to justify the endeavour, but with the addition of present day stealth elements, this filler was totally unwelcome. The level design itself is often breathtakingly beautiful, and I can't really fault the pathways and aesthetic in most places other than the present day, and what kept me going in LOS 2 were the moments where it was being a good Castlevania game. The unique and frightening bosses, the clever writing, the awesome characters and the brutal, tricky combat. These elements were strong enough to keep me going, but only barely, as the frustrating stealth and filler platforming demanded patience that was quickly growing thin.
My prince, thank you, thank you so much for this infinite kindness. I don't know how to thank you enough.
You gave me your word.
There's a whole lot in LOS 2 that should have been removed. Even if it's over 12 hours long to complete, I would have been happier if the entire game was as long as the soundtrack for the same price if it kept up its momentum and aesthetic. If it had some consistency, I wouldn't have minded a shorter game. Unfortunately, something went a little fucky at Mercury Steam, and despite Alvarez saying one must be blind or stupid to give a game a 4 out of 10 mark with this quality, I can't help but sympathise with anyone frustrated enough to take it out on what good there is here. LOS 2 is at a constant war with itself. Parts of it demand a 10 out of 10, but others are chipping away at the score constantly and considerably. Elements thrown in for the sake of marketing have severely damaged the title, and ironically enough, LOS 2 demands the patience of a saint to get through this unholy disappointment. It's definitely not worth a 4 out of 10, but the promise that was 2010's Lords of Shadow didn't prepare anyone for some of the design decisions made for this sequel. Completely it ends with the elements that worked. Half of LOS 2 is superb, but the other half is just a functional, albeit uninspired disaster.